Hi, I'm Gerrit Hoppe, and I'm a trained architect and BIM manager. I'm quite excited today to talk a little bit about our take on mixed reality, how we use Unreal Engine in a BIM context, and why for us, VR is not necessarily always just a toy. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be talking a little bit about how we tackle communication problems in our clients' projects, as well as how we try to enrich their processes through the use of technology. Maybe to give a little bit of context before I get started and talk a little bit about my company, I work for Fomitas, have been working for Fomitas for the past 5 years. And what we basically do is we provide services for digitization of the AEC industry. The construction industry in Germany is traditionally a little more skeptical about technology, about change, and about changing proven processes to something that might work a little bit better. For an example, BIM has only really been a topic in Germany for the greater part of the last 3 to 5 years in comparison to our neighboring European countries. This is why Fomitas has taken it upon ourselves to become a disrupting force and be a driver of digital construction. Our main services are situated around building information modeling, where we do BIM management with our partners and clients. Digital transformation, where we not only provide a technical infrastructure for the change to BIM, but also try to unlock the digital potential of our clients. And the department that I've had the pleasure of heading over the past 3 years, virtual and augmented reality, where we tried to tackle communication errors before they happen through the means of visual technologies. Maybe really quick in numbers. We were founded over 10 years ago, have grown to over 50 plus employees, and in that time now have had over 150 successfully implemented BIM projects under our belt. We call 4 locations in Europe our home. Good. Now, you might be wondering what cows have to do with any of this, what cows have to do with consumer electronics. Well, there's a really great story about this rancher in the Midwestern US who I think in 2016 came up with a really interesting story. And the reason I like this story so much, when I'll tell it to you in a second, is because it illustrates quite well our philosophy on how to adopt technology as well. Now, if you look at this, this is something you might know. For me personally, I like to track my jogging route. Basically, my phone is my companion for almost everything I do. It sleeps next to me and it tracks things. Specifically, um, with the jogging aspect, I always wanted to kind of see how I can optimize myself. So when would I need to maybe have a little sprint burst? When do I actually lack power, maybe on an incline? All these things. And basically, on an amateur level, of course, this is not very important, but being able to optimize yourself through tracking has become something that we've grown quite accustomed to. The cattle rancher basically did the same thing. Because there was no technology to kind of help him figure out where his herd would be at what given time, and there was no possibility for him to track his herd, he slapped a Fitbit onto every cow he owned, just to be able to see where they were going, why they were going there, and at what times maybe his ranch or parts of his ranch would be free to be able to optimize his processes around that. So when he would be able to mow the lawn, when he would be able to process land, maybe even rent out a little bit of his ranch because the cows never really went there to his neighbors. What he got in the end, if you look at these diagrams, was not only the location of his cows at any given time in retrospect, but also due to heartbeat and temperature sensors that he then added on top of the Fitbit. He was able to tell when his cows would be in heat. I think needless to say, this was the most successful mating season for him, all based on technology and basically the misuse of technology, because who would kind of think about slapping a Fitbit onto a cow? You might be wondering how that relates to architecture and how that relates to the construction process in general. Well, If you think about space, I, for instance, can now describe a space 5 by 5 meters, and I have a very specific room inside my mind. And depending on how many people are actually listening to me right now, there might be an infinite amount of spaces like this. So basically, because I'm describing an abstract room to you, and you're kind of trying to follow what I'm describing, so maybe where the windows might be or how the floor might look, we're kind of talking about this similar topic of a room, but we're not talking about the same space in general. So the abstraction of space always creates problems. Depending on how many people might be involved in a planning process, because it's not only the architect and maybe the developer, but there's also different disciplines. There's someone that actually has to read the plans and build it. There it becomes quite complex because it's a very big network of people that actually have to work together to be able to build and construct a building itself. Architects are used to this. So in the planning industry, we always use planning tools like sketches or even floor plans. So this is something that I, as a trained architect, can read quite well. This is a floor plan of the Barcelona pavilion in Barcelona by Mies van der Rohe. He has additional information on materials that are used for the specific elements of the walls and the flooring. So I have quite a good idea in my mind already looking at this of what the space actually looks like. My girlfriend, on the other hand, doesn't because, number one, she's not an architect and she wasn't there yet. So it's basically an abstract space for her looking at this. So I can describe it, but she will never really see it in her own mind the same way I do. Facility manager, for instance, might look at the same building, so the Barcelona pavilion, in a very different way by having lists of elements inside that building. So how many doors, how many tiles that might need to be taken care of, how many light fixtures, etc. So this is his very personal take on that building and his way of understanding the space surrounding it. Other planning tools to make the translation or closing the gap a little more easier might be scale models, something that every architecture student knows and usually hates to build. That has been translated to digital means quite well now through BIM. So basically digital Lego pieces that not only give a 3D representation of what they actually are in comparison to the next element surrounding it, but also tagging on information to that. Don't worry, as a BIM manager, I won't bore you about the BIM process now because I want to talk more about the visualization aspect. Renderings as a communications tool have been around for almost as long as anything has been constructed. So if it was drawn rendering or now computer-generated renderings, they have always been there to actually close that gap and help people understand what the planner was talking about. This rendering is quite easy to read because this is a perspective that we've grown to accustomed to seeing quite well. We have an idea of scale inside this space. We can kind of read how far that back wall might be away or how large actually the elements and the furniture might be inside this. So the gap of understanding is closing with these different tools that we're using. The fun thing introducing BIM into this is that you can generate these computer-generated renderings quite easily by clicking a button. It just gets sent to the cloud, and then you get this rendering back depending on how well you actually modeled the BIM model itself and the elements inside that. And why this is great is because I can now, instead of just using the floor plan that might be too abstract for the laboratory worker that's actually supposed to work in this laboratory, I can use this rendering as an addition to ask him if he would be happy with the electrical outlets or with the positioning of the specific elements that he would actually need to get through the day-by-day activities of his work. So I, at a very early time as a planner, can introduce someone that is not a planner, so the laboratory worker, into the process and ask him for his input of how this actually is supposed to be done quite well. At Formitas, we basically always have that kind of technology approach to these things. My field, virtual reality, of course, is kind of a no-brainer in comparison when put into context with BIM, because we have a 3D model off the bat that doesn't need to be modeled up, and we can just basically use that to create not only 2D stills, but fully immersive real-time visualizations. So it's kind of more about the outlet and the medium that we use to go further. It might be that we work with a cave system. The cave, you can kind of think about four glass walls, a glass floor that are projected against with 3D shutter glasses. I can basically navigate through a BIM model that might have been detailed, and I can have an entire planning team within that space, that virtual space, to actually kind of get more insights into the interdisciplinary aspect of the planning. So you have the entire team that is able to go through the building the same way they would go through the physical built building and talk about it without even one brick laid or 1 ounce of concrete poured until that time. So it's a much more intuitive understanding of the surrounding element before we even get started, including even the social cues going. Since you can't always go to a cave system, in our case, standing in Aachen, of course, the rise of HMD, consumer virtual reality, has been great. In our case, using the Oculus Rift, we can take virtual reality to the client. So we can start working on the BIM model, and then we can take a laptop and the Oculus to him to have the same effect of that insight. And then, of course, with Unreal, having fidelity in a box is just great, because with very little knowledge of how to actually program a computer game, it is almost possible for everyone to really have a great looking visualization off the bat. Now, even with programs like Twinmotion, it's become a lot easier to create content. Now, we've been using Unreal in the BIM context for the greater part of the past 4 years now, and there's a very specific reason for that. So this is even before all of the great things that have happened at Unreal over the past 2 years and Unreal Enterprise. If you think about how a client usually approaches a visualizer or someone that provides visualization services, it's usually that he has some form of data. He has some form of idea of what it actually is that he wants. And of course, he wants it as quickly and as cheaply as possible done. So he might want a virtual reality walkthrough. He might want a video. He might just want some 2D renderings. And there's usually in his mind a tool that can accomplish that. This is a very romantic view of how this actually works in a complex process like construction. The reality is there are always multiple data points, data entry points. The client doesn't necessarily always really know what it is he wants, but he usually jumps from one rock to another. When he has the renderings, he wants a video. When he has a video, he wants the VR visualization in real time. And this has been a problem until we actually really started using Unreal, because Unreal makes it possible to mix and match all kinds of client aims, and can almost eat any form of data entry by now, especially after Datasmith that I'm going to get into in a second. When you think about virtual reality, on the one hand, you always kind of think of these really high fidelity visualizations of spaces, usually apartments that are well furnished, have glossy materials, really look great and can sell great. Our take on that is that's great, and it's cool that we can do that quite easily in Unreal, but usually the environment we need to create has different tiers. So it might be that we have to look at a machine depicted here quite closely, instead of the surrounding architecture, in the same way that we would have to look at something else. So basically mixing and matching different levels of information, different levels of detail within the same visualization, not having everything at high end and high gloss, is usually better than trying to have a real simulation of reality going on, because with something like this, even a factory line worker can start thinking about his future workplace a lot better. So what we basically came up with over the past 5 years, while we've been working on virtual reality in the BIM context, is sort of layered usage tiers. So going from the BIM model, first layer, of course, is the kind of look and feel. What you see is what you get layer. You can navigate through the building, you can evaluate it, you can simulate light, you can simulate also maybe distances, but it's kind of static. The only thing moving might be yourself through the building. The second is the touch layer, where you can have interaction with the visualization itself. So manipulate things, maybe pull up a chair, move furniture around. Sketch in 3D is something that has been predominant over the past 2 years for us, where you can actually start to really play with the entire visualization itself. And then the third tier, coming from the BIM aspect and a very connective, collaborative usage of technology inside a planning process. Of course, the functionalities of annotating and sharing and communicating with the VR is something that has been something we've been working on for the past year in specific to really get ahead with it. So what that means is not just high-end visualization, high fidelity, but something with a little bit of oomph to it. Might be a functionality of just taking the building away from the architect so that he can look at the technical facilities and understand how they work without just looking from his own point of view and really understanding what the other planners are working on as well. Now, a little bit very briefly about the BIM process, how we see it as BIM managers. It's usually a circular system, so iterative steps going on. The author, let's call him the architect, is working with an author software that creates the BIM models, which he then uploads to a common data environment. We're in the top bracket currently. That then is coordinated by someone like us to see how many clashes there might be between the different disciplines. And then we talk about everything that we find. We started introducing visualization, 2D, 3D, and real-time visualization into this to not only have the hard clashes, so everything that a computer can find, but also introducing different stakeholders into this process. Not only the architects, the planners, but also usage groups that will have to use the spaces later to create insights along the planning process at the right points. And Unreal has been really great, even before Datasmith with that, but it was always a huge overhead of really tackling the different data inputs, optimizing them maybe with 3ds Max before we were even able to get it into Unreal, before we were able to articulate materials, optimize the models, or even create functionalities that really would help along the communication process. Then writing out a very static program that then somehow the insights when running the program would have to be carried back into the planning process on the left. Datasmith really saved us there. We really were happy when it was introduced, even though it is now is starting to really reach its full potential, because it really cut the overhead down to a minimum. So we're very easily now, with the data format IFC, able to introduce all sorts of interdisciplinary models into Unreal very easily. I think there's another panel on optimization pipeline, so I'm not going to talk about that today. But what that does for us is we have a lot more time to actually really work on the quality of the visualization and the functionalities. So really make tailor-made functions for the specific problems to really drill down to the individual problems of the project that we're working on from the BIM context. And then communicating from the program back into the planning iteration loops has become much easier, as well, as you're going to see in a couple of steps. So basically, really looking at the functionality is something that we've been going forward to. It might be that we have sort of a IKEA furniture planner going on for a workshop with laboratory technicians, where they, in virtual reality, are supposed to pull together their optimal workspace directly into the real space. But the more we've been doing this, the more we've started to notice that sometimes it's better to make it a bit more abstract again. So not necessarily have the factories standing around the specific working environment of the line worker that is now, in this case, working on his optimal setting of everything he would need to put together the car pieces at his station. But to really just have everything, all the single elements he needs for him to kind of put together in a sandbox environment to really drill down. And also kind of to simulate the design alternatives in a much better way to see which decision of optimization on paper would affect him individually the most. So if now, for instance, this line gets too slim, he won't be able to pull the door around the column. These are things that we love to do in virtual reality to really validate the planning aspect before they run into problems once the building is there and they can't really change anything anymore. Another thing we noticed was that scale is always kind of a thing. Even the room that I was talking about, 5 by 5 meters, is in a building, and that building is always in an urban space. Depending on how big the city or the village might be around it, that space might be bigger or smaller. We took it upon ourselves to not only necessarily always look at the buildings, but also the surrounding spaces to really see how far we can push the BIM aspect within this. This is what we call macro BIM, because we noticed that the language of building information modeling doesn't really differ if you're building a building, so a laboratory, or a bridge for the same instance. The process behind it might be contextually different, but what we need to be able to grasp, so the information of single elements or also how it looks for, let's say, someone that has a residence right next to this bridge that is supposed to be constructed, is usually the same. So the mode of transporting the imagery and transporting the information is the same. So basically going seamlessly from a room to an entire urban scale is easily done, even with a lot of information from BIM. So being able to visualize all of this is great, and to gain insights is great as well. But we noticed about a year ago that, most of our presentations or most of our usage within VR usually had the same setup. Someone would walk through either in the cave system or within glasses, and there would be someone sitting next to him, scribbling frantically everything that he was talking about, and then later trying to piece that back together to whatever location that was going on. Within the BIM field, we have a solution for half of this already outside the box. So something that we've been using for the last 3 years is BIM collaboration format, either as a file or with a BCF server in the middle, to be able to tackle the planning problem. So every time we have a hard clash between elements, we can write out a BCF, and then the planner is taken immediately when he accesses the BCF inside his author software to the problem. So it's not necessarily a telephone call telling him where to navigate inside his program or screen share, but he gets very quickly what we're talking about immediately. And we were kind of always looking for that within virtual reality as well, because having a virtual experience, a spatial experience simulated for you is great because you understand the room much better. But again, when you're talking about it, there's always that gap that's kind of going on. What we did was to be able to tie in that information loop quite seamlessly, go back and create a link, a BCF link, right out of the virtual reality visualization that we were working on. And this is something we call BIM-Integrated virtual reality, to be able not only to see the space as planned as a 3D model, but also to be able to connect to the BCF platform, to synchronize all the issues that might already have been made, to review them directly. So to set the status of it, it might have been taken care of. To teleport to it directly, to look at it, and as you're seeing, this is not necessarily a high-end, high-fidelity visualization that we're working on, but it works on a productive level very well because you can see it with your own eyes. And when we're informing the spatial awareness through the walkthrough, so we're creating that virtual experience, we also want to be able to track everything that we notice inside that. So we want to be able to create issues within virtual reality directly. We kind of do that the same way we would do on a construction site with our phone. So we create a snapshot that has a vector and a position going on. We can set the type for that, so it might be an issue, an error, or even just a question that is sent then to the architect. And we can then also just say what this is about. So please fix it, and then synchronize and upload it to the platform itself, thus closing the loop quite seamlessly to the different platforms, author softwares, or even the BIM Collab platform that is accessible online. And then if you kind of look at it in a different viewer, again, you get taken to it quite easily. You can get all sorts of information on that issue. So be able to react to it even on your smartphone without having the entire data, or you can look at it within the author software and then tackle the problem immediately without having to find the issue. So it's much more efficient to be able to revise problems going on there. And being able to communicate seamlessly between all these different viewers that we use in the planning context in Unreal has been something that we made possible now with the plugin that we created, thus boosting the productivity and understanding a bit. Now, the way we did that was to basically look at how BCF works in general, so the file format, the way that it's set up, and recreate that within Unreal. So we write into a struct not only the position, but also the camera vector, the different selected building elements that the issue might be referenced to, the screenshot, of course, that we pull directly out of the visualization, the comments that might be in there, also audio comments, the labels that are connected, etc. So basically everything that's within the BCF natively is something that we write into a struct and then convert into a JSON to be able to push it up to the BCF server. And then you can, again, pull it or post it accordingly. So this is all the magic behind it. Of course, very abbreviated, but quite easily done. The great part for us about all of this is, of the 50 plus people that are working for Formitas now, only 3 people are able to use Unreal. And being able to not only create the visualizations, but also to create functionality is something with such a small aspect of people that actually can wield the program, great in combination with people that are actually working side by side with the planners, the BIM managers, and all the insights that we get from our different colleagues within the company. So this is something that Unreal has been enabled us quite well to do, to be able to basically drill down to the individual problems of every product, and very quickly to be able to prototype a solution, communicative solution to all of this going on. So I hope I was able to kind of trigger something inside you. I would love to hear your thoughts about all of this. So please reach out and connect if there's anything that you have questions about. And yeah, so thank you for your time. And I'm very much looking forward to your questions now. Thanks so much.